I don't know exactly when I realized something was wrong, because it wasn't a moment. It was more like a slow awareness creeping in. The way you notice a smell in a room and can't remember when it started. And it happened while I was walking through a place I'd walked through dozens of times before. A long pedestrian path that cut behind a shopping district and connected two busy streets. Nothing isolated, nothing dramatic, just concrete. Fencing, graffiti, layered over older graffiti, and a steady flow of people coming and going at different hours. And that familiarity is probably why it took me so long to accept what my instincts were trying to tell me. Because halfway down the path, I noticed a man walking towards me from the opposite direction. Average in every possible way. Not threatening, not memorable. Just someone you wouldn't describe if asked later. And as we passed each other, I felt that subtle tightening in my chest, that irrational flicker of awareness, and I dismissed it immediately, because he hadn't done anything, hadn't even looked at me too long, hadn't said a word. And I kept walking, counting steps, thinking about what I needed to do next, until I reached the end of the path and turned onto the street, and that's when I saw him again, standing across the road near a storefront facing my direction. Not crossing, not moving, just watching. And I remember feeling embarrassed by the fear that rose up in me. Because the street was busy, cars were passing, people around, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd been followed. And when I crossed the street, he crossed too. A few seconds later, not rushing, not hiding it. And I told myself there were only so many ways to go. That coincidence was inevitable. Until I ducked into a small shop, stayed there longer than I needed to, pretending to browse, and when I finally stepped back outside, he was there again, leaning against a pole like he'd been waiting. And he smiled. Not wide, not friendly, just acknowledging. And said my name. Quietly, like it was nothing. And I froze. Because it wasn't shouted or used to get attention, it was said the way someone says your name when they already have it, when they've practiced it. And I asked who he was. And he shrugged, said we'd crossed paths before, said I looked familiar, said it wasn't that strange, and every word was reasonable. Every excuse something you couldn't argue with without sounding dramatic. And that's how he kept me there. Talking while my fear tried to claw its way up my throat. And when I finally stepped back and told him I needed to go, he nodded easily and said of course, then added that he'd see me again anyway. Because he always did. I laughed nervously, took off down the street and didn't look back until I reached a bus stop crowded with people. And I felt safe there. Surrounded, anonymous again. And I almost convinced myself it had been nothing, until the bus arrived and I got on and saw him already seated near the back, looking out the window as if he hadn't noticed me at all. I stood frozen for a second too long before taking a seat near the front, my heart pounding, watching his reflection in the glass. He didn't move, didn't look, didn't react, and when the bus stopped a few blocks later, he got off and I stayed on, shaking. Telling myself it was over, but over the next few weeks I started seeing him everywhere. Never close enough to touch me, never do anything overt, just present. Across streets, at intersections, once at the far end of a cafe, always alone, always calm, and every time our eyes met he gave me that same small nod, like we shared something, like this was normal. And I changed my routes, my schedule, my habits, and still, he appeared. Never speaking again, never approaching, just making sure I knew he could. And the worst part was how quickly people stopped believing me. How easy it was for them to say I was imagining patterns. That stress can do strange things. And I started doubting myself too, wondering if fear had rewired my brain until one night I came home to find a note slipped under my door. Folded neatly, no envelope, Just my name written in careful block letters. And inside it said, "You forgot your lights again." My blood ran cold because I knew I had left them on that night. I remembered switching them off before bed, and the realization settled over me slowly and heavily. Not that he was watching me from afar, but that he'd been close enough to know, close enough to enter my building, close enough to stand outside my door without me ever hearing him. And I didn't sleep that night, or the next, or the one after that. I stopped going places unless I had to, stopped taking shortcuts, stopped trusting crowds, because I understood that visibility doesn't protect you. Predictability does the opposite. And eventually the sighting stopped. The note was the last thing. Weeks passed, then months, and I moved, changed everything I could, and for a while it worked. The fear faded to something manageable, something distant, until one morning on a completely different street in a completely different part of the city, I felt that tightening in my chest again, that now familiar warning. And when I looked up, there he was, standing across the road, same expression, same patience, older maybe just clearer now that I knew what I was looking at. And this time he smiled fully, like he was proud of how long it had taken me to understand. He raised his hand in a small wave, not a threat, not a goodbye, just a reminder. And I realized then that the scariest part wasn't that he kept finding me. It was that he didn't need to hurry, because people like him don't chase. They wait, and they know that eventually you'll start watching the world the way they do. Always looking, always wondering, who's paying attention? And once that happens, they've already won.